true power is not in winning arguments, but in dominating himself and conduct interactions in a strategic way. Have you ever tried to convince someone with logical arguments? But instead of winning the argument, notice that the person became even more resistant. This is a common problem. We argue thinking that reason will prevail. But the reality is different. The more we try to prove a point, but the other becomes attached to his own. No final, nobody wins, just wears out. Most discussions do not seek the truth, but feed the ego. People enter into debates driven by the desire for validation, not out of a genuine interest in learning, and it generates a toxic cycle. You argue, outro rebate, the conversation heats up and the initial goal is lost. In the heat of the moment, we understand what really matters is not the logic of the argument, but the way emotions shape perception of reality. Inspired by Nietzsche's philosophy about the quest for power, this video explores how the water can be applied in everyday life to transform the way we interact and influence others. Friedrich Nietzsche saw the power not like the ability to impose ideas by force, but like the ability to control yourself and so influence others. Instead of reacting impulsively, the true strategist chooses when to speak and when it sets. That's what we're going to explore, as the universe often is stronger than any word. Discuss seems to be the natural way to taste a point, but the truth is, most heated conversations does not lead to real change. Reason. The brain, human, is not programmed to accept arguments who challenge your lines. On the contrary, when someone feels that your ideas are being attacked, the instinct is to defend yourself and not to give up. This happens because of what psychologists call intelligence bias. Instead of analyzing rationally the information we receive, we tend to look for evidence that reinforce what we already believe, i.e., the more you try to defeat someone in an argument, the more that person clings to his own opinion. The result, instead of convincing you, creates resistance. Another error common is to confuse debate with social validation. Many people come into discussions not because they want to learn something new, but because they want to prove they're right, when the goal is not knowledge, but the desire to emerge victorious. Every conversation becomes a battle of egos. If you find yourself arguing to reassert your position, is falling exactly into this trap. In addition, emotional reactivity weakens any position. The instant you lose control and starts to respond in the heat of the moment, you already lost, because those who react are being manipulated by the environment, while whoever holds the shield controls conversation dynamics. Most fights are not won with arguments, but with presence and posture. Nietzsche argued that real power is not in rebutting every provocation, but in mastering your own reactions. It's this idea that takes us to the next point, as the philosophy of strategic learning can transform its influence in any situation. Friedrich Nietzsche understood power differently than most of people. For him, the true domain was in brute force or the imposition of ideas, but in the ability to influence reality without being a slave to one's own emotions. Your concept of will to power wasn't just about dominating others, but mostly mastering himself. At the center of this thought is in the figure of the Übersticker, the Superman, he who transcends his instinctive reactions and acts strategically. He doesn't get angry with provocations, doesn't wear yourself out trying to prove a point, and does not automatically react to external. He observes, reflects, and chooses when and how to manifest. This idea connects directly with the power of the strategic planning. Paranoid learning was not synonymous with passivity, but a powerful control tool. Who dominates the championship? Put respect without needing to wear out. Instead of falling into the trap of emotional debates, it creates tension and forces the other to reveal himself. Aging has a profound psychological effect. When someone expects an answer and receives only a break, appearance begins to erode your confidence. The human mind hates emptiness and, before the mirror, fills this space with doubts and interpretations. That's the secret of strategic dynamism. Instead of react to every provocation, you allow that the other gets lost in his own insecurity. Nietzsche believed that most people was a prisoner of her own emotions, and that the true force was in control of these automatic responses. In your words, he who cannot command himself. You will always end up being commanded by someone. In the real world, we see this principle being applied by leaders, strategists, and influencers who know that talking less is often the way to conquer more. The idea that the universe can be a tool of power, it's not just theoretical. She was applied by some of the brightest minds in history. Of philosophers, there are business strategists and legendary warriors. Many influential figures knew how to use audio to control interactions and win battles without having to raise your voice. Socrates never had to prove himself right. He just asked questions. Your method, known as Socratic maieutic, consisted of a dialectical game of questions and answers, followed by more questions. He questioned, listened, and let the opponent himself contradict himself. This process, in addition to avoiding direct confrontations, made the person feel responsible for changing opinion, which made learning much more effective. This strategy is still used by great negotiators and leaders. Instead of trying to convince someone right away, ask strategic questions that lead the other to see flaws in their own logic. It doesn't just conflicts, but it makes people come to the right conclusions on behalf of own, which is much more powerful than simply tell them what to think was. Jobs was not a man of many words. He knew that in negotiations and presentations, that was his greatest weapon. When you wanted your team or partners to take a decision, he took a break and waited. The discomfort of forced others to fill the space, often giving in to the idea that Jobs wanted to impose. Jobs' strategic imperative created tension and uncertainty. When he finally spoke, his words carried weight. He mastered the rhythm of conversations and used calculated breaks to force his listeners to resist. This ability not only helped him build Apple, but also made him one of the most influential figures in the contemporary world. The legendary Indian Miyamoto Musashi understood that a fight started long before the first sword to be unsheathed. He used the freedom to destabilize your opponents. When challenged to a duel, often arrived late on purpose, forcing the enemy to wait and to be consumed by anxiety. This psychological game undermined the opponent's confidence, even before the fight starts. Musashi also adopted one minimalist combat style. Did not waste energy with unnecessary blows. Instead, studied the movement of the enemy, waited for an arrow and attacked at the exact moment. Your absolute self-control made him one of the greatest warriors in history. The principle behind these stories is clear. Who controls the citizen controls the situation. In debates, negotiations, or even in battles, he who keeps calm and uses strategic breaks gains advantage. This brings us to an important question. Why so many people fail to use this technique? The answer lies in the psychology of reactivity. If the universe is such a powerful weapon, because most people feels the need to fill in each space with words, the answer lies in human psychology. Our mind is programmed to react impulsively to external, especially when we feel challenged. This is because discussing for the brain is not just an exchange of ideas, it's a fight for identity, control, and validation. One of the biggest obstacles to productive conversations is learning bias, also known as selective evidence collection. This phenomenon makes people seek only information that reinforce your previous beliefs. ignoring any argument to the contrary. When someone challenges us in one debate, we do not interpret this as one learning opportunity, but like one threat. Our instinct, then, is to rebut, defend, and reaffirm our certainties, no matter how logic be the evidence presented. This explains why most discussions does not change opinions, just strengthens positions. Instead of dialoguing, we enter a resistance cycle, making any argument accessible. Another reason why we react impulsively is because we interpret criticisms as attacks on our identity. If someone questions our political beliefs, religious or moral, we don't just see this as one disagreement of ideas, but as one personal affront. This triggers the amygdala, the brain part responsible for emotional responses, triggering defensive and aggressive reactions. This phenomenon explains why many discussions get out of hand. Instead of keeping calm, we are taken by need to protect who we believe to be. Or, in this context, it's an act of force, because it shows that you don't have to defend yourself against everything. You have dominion over yourself. Many people believe that by speaking louder or imposing in their opinions, are gaining influence. But true control is not in dominating the other, but in mastering the reaction itself. Who feels the need to respond to everything is actually being guided by the environment. Think of history's great strategic leaders. Were rarely the ones who spoke too much, but those who could hear, observe, and act at the right time. Strategic dynamism is not a sign of weakness, but an indication of psychological maturity. If we want to gain more power in our interactions, we need first learn to control our reactivity. And for that, the next step is to understand how to apply the strategic planning. No, day by day, saber, that aluminum is a powerful tool, is one thing. But how to put it into practice on a daily basis? The secret lies in 3 fundamental techniques. Use silence as an answer. Control your nonverbal communication, and use strategic breaks to take advantage. In conversations and negotiations, in many situations, the best way to impose yourself is not refuting an argument, but letting the other person handle the discomfort itself. Monitoring can be especially effective when someone tries to provoke thee or manipulate it emotionally. Imagine someone makes a critical comment, waiting for you to defend yourself. If you react, is playing on the other person's field, validating the provocation. But if you just look, smiles slightly, and does not respond, you create psychological tension. The other begins to doubt his own argument. The absence of response forces you to fill the void, and often, he recoils or loses control. Or is even more powerful when combined with the correct body language. What differentiates a person who is in orbit because it is cornered from someone who is in orbit because they are in control? Posture, look, and presence. Maintain firm eye contact without ing excessively. Maintain one relaxed posture and show no hurry to respond. Are domain signs. In many situations, your behavior says more than your words. People who speak quickly and without breaks transmit anxiety. Who uses the between sentences transmits power. Great communicators, as politicians and negotiators, use breaks to create the character and increase the impact of your words. In addition, silence before an answer forces the other to pay more attention to what will be said. This is especially useful in situations where you need to reinforce your authority. Apply strategic imperative does not mean to always shut up, but yes, know when to speak and when let the other get lost in his own speech. Dominate this skill is what separates impulsive people of true social strategists. Now that we understand how to use audio in practice, let's tie it all up with a final reflection on true power. Behind this strategy, if there's a central lesson in everything we've seen so far, is that true power doesn't come from speaking anymore, but to control when and how to speak. He who dominates his own impulse to respond impulsively, if it returns, of course, most respected. more influential and harder to manipulate. Thread taught us that the will to power begins within us. And figures like Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi showed how the universe can be a powerful weapon. In any social interaction, there is an invisible game of influence going on. Who understands this game stops falling into the trap of useless debates and learn to use the audio to become a stronger presence. Now I invite you to a challenge. In your next discussion or difficult conversation, try using strategic learning. Expect to observe. Don't rush to answer. See how this changes the dynamics. And if you've used this strategy before or want to share your experiences, leave your comment below.